The most surprising thing about negotiations in 2025, I think that will shock most of the viewers, is really how much value is being lost between the parties. I see that all the time. When I explain to my students and clients that up to 42% of the value in a negotiation often is being lost, not capitalized, not utilized between the two parties. And the two parties don't even see that value. A lot of people really look at me like I just arrived from a different planet. A lot of people are in disbelief, and a lot of people don't really understand it until we run through a simulation. We go in to look at their own negotiation, and we identify and capitalize the variables that can help them address that 42%. So that 42% value lost in negotiation is what we call NegeEconomics. That is short for negotiation economics. And that's the mathematical model I created that basically just identified the asymmetric value, the difference between your cost and my value, or my cost and your value. And that is really a shock to a lot of people, that we have that amazing amount of value just lying there and is not being utilized by either party. Great question. A lot of negotiations are basically being lost even before the party starts. And why is that? Well, I would say this thing. One of the most dangerous negotiations you can ever get into is the one that you don't see is a negotiation. So you're basically behind on points already right there if you don't realize that you are right now negotiating. The other thing I would say is that lack of preparation. I usually use the term that you probably know, that not preparing is the same as preparing for complete failure. And that happens to too many negotiators out there. They feel they can rely on their history, on their experience, on their knowledge, and don't really sit down and take the proper time to prepare themselves. I can promise you, in every single workshop we have conducted in the last 30 years for thousands of organizations, one of the chapters that surprises most of the participants the most is how much we need to prepare before stepping into any negotiations and what to prepare exactly. Well, it was actually quite easy because AI really appeared for the first time on my radar in 2019. We started to do the first studies and research on AI and the use of AI in negotiation back in 2019. And remember, when we talk the period of AI, this is back in ancient time, when we just go back 5, 6, 7 years. So back in 2019, we did our first studies and have then continued repeating research within the field of AI and negotiations. And it was obvious to me 2 years ago that we needed a book. We needed more knowledge on how to integrate AI into negotiations. So I approached my publisher, Wiley, suggested the idea, and they loved it immediately, and I started working on it. And the book is very much based on those studies and research. So it's all based on real research, real data, real knowledge. It's not just my assumptions or guesswork or whatever I feel is right or wrong. It's actually based on solid, peer-reviewed research on how we can utilize AI correctly and what benefits we can gain from AI in negotiation. But secondly, also warnings, what we should be careful about. So it was pretty easy for me to develop that idea, and obviously took a lot of work creating that in a book form. But here it is. The book is out, it's ready, and I certainly hope the readers will enjoy it. Summarizing the book in one sentence, that's not easy, but if I should come up with something, I would probably be future of negotiation. That's it. I mean, there's an old way to negotiate and there's a new way to negotiate. The old way to negotiate was something we did 5, 7 years ago. Pre-AI, we were sitting down as human beings, face to face or virtually, and negotiating without the use of technology. Today, we have to embrace AI, not because I'm saying it, but simply because I know one thing, and that is negotiators using AI will do better than negotiators not utilizing AI. So AI is a tool just like a spreadsheet or a calculator or a computer. It's something that will just make your negotiation better. So clear advice, we need to use AI. Is not a thing that is nice, it's a thing that is needed. I've never been a big fan of the term win-win. And the reason for that is perhaps a little bit weird, but quite often when I walk into new organizations I haven't worked with before, I ask them, what is your official negotiation strategy? And quite often the answer I'm getting is, well, it's win-win. We want to create a success for the counterpart and a success for us. And that's all nice and dandy. But in reality, when you dive into the details, what win-win means to a lot of organizations is the more we win, and perhaps the more the counterpart loses, the more we have created win-win. Now, that is obviously not the official idea about win-win. That is, generating a win, but not at the expense of the counterpart. So the term win-win is really not one I'm applauding. Now, I am obviously a commercial negotiator that strongly believe in a collaborative approach to negotiation, simply because it's the only way where we can generate NegeEconomics, the asymmetric value of up to 42% between the parties. However, in order to do that, we have to break with the old mentality of negotiation, the old way and the new way. Now, the old way is a lot of the books that are out there that is basically talking about using psychology in negotiation. How can you manipulate the counterpart? How can you ask questions that will kind of manipulate the counterpart into a certain mode, or give you an answer, or persuade them into a certain way of thinking? And it's all fun at parties and stuff, but in reality, we are not sitting in a negotiation to try and be smart. We don't want to be street smart. It's not a hostage negotiation where we have to convince the criminal to give up the hostage and give up so we can arrest that individual. A commercial negotiation is somewhat very different. It's a group exercise to create and distribute value. That's it. That's the only reason commercially we are negotiating. So the focus have to be on the economical side, not about the psychology. So that requires transparency. It requires honesty. It requires a certain understanding of the economical impact of changing variables, and the list goes on and on and on. And this is certainly an area where AI can support and help us. There was a very interesting study conducted recently by MIT. And what they did was they had a number, I think it was 180 different bots negotiating with each other. And the bots that were more manipulating gained value, but they did it at a cost, because they actually ranked among the 12% lowest ranked counterparts. So that means that even bots don't want to negotiate with other bots that are manipulating. So bots don't appreciate very manipulating behavior, and human beings certainly don't do that either. So the second that you identify and realize that the counterpart is trying to be street smart, to try and ask psychology questions, that is basically the purpose is just trying to outmaneuver you, we resist that, and trust is obviously declining. So back to your question. The purpose of this book is basically separating itself from the old way of thinking, moving into more collaborative, transparent, open, and honest negotiation. And why? Not just to be a good human being, but to capture more value than we would otherwise. Yes, that is right. This is my book number 27. And I've obviously been around a lot of different topics in negotiation. And I have to be honest and say, a couple of years ago, I thought I was done. I was thinking there's no real need for another book. And you know what? It may sound weird coming from an author of 27 books on negotiation, but I don't really think there's a need for more books on negotiations out there on the market. There's so many books out there. And if it's not a question about the knowledge is not there, it's just a question that you and I actually use that knowledge that we got in all those books being published. So a piece of information to all future publishers and authors of books on negotiation, don't do it. There isn't really a need. However, there is a need for the smart negotiator. I'm not just saying that to sell it, but there is a need because this is the first and so far only book that is capturing and embracing the idea of AI in negotiation. So the smart negotiator is partly discussing the science of negotiation, but certainly integrating with more than 50% of the total content of the book, focusing on technology. How do we correctly use AI in negotiation? What is the benefit? What is the prompting? What is the rules? What is the setup? How do we prepare? And all of that. So this book is really securing the next decade in negotiation because it's preparing you how we are going to negotiate, not a month from now, not a week from now, but basically right now. Because you have to remember, there are thousands of people out there already embracing the use of AI in negotiation. And if you're negotiating with a counterpart that is using AI, they're already ahead. One story in the book that I think will make readers stop and think for a moment is the question about trust. Let me just take a step back and explain it this way. If we have a high level of trust in any negotiation, our transaction cost will go down and our profit will go up. And the opposite will happen if trust is low. Transaction cost will go up and profit will decline. I did my doctorate on negotiation, the use of AI, and trust. And one of my purposes in my research was actually try and capitalize the value on trust. And we did that. We managed to document and prove that trust in negotiation will actually increase the value by up to 34%. So in negotiations where there's a high level of trust, we will capture 34% more value than in negotiations with a low level of trust. And this is not guesswork, it's actually based on research and data. And I think one of the stories in the book that will capture the readers is how AI can actually help increase trust in negotiation. I actually got the comment already from some readers who read the initial version of the book, those who are doing endorsement, and some of them said it's actually intriguing that we need AI to help humans become more trustworthy. And I love that quote because that's actually the case. We could clearly see from our studies that when both sides were using AI, trust, transparency, and honesty actually went through the roof compared to what I would call old school negotiations, where both parties are negotiating without the use of AI. And why? Well, you have to grab a copy of the book to understand why. Yes, I feel very honored and humble and fortunate that the Smartnership concept have received so many international awards. I think at the last count, we had won more than 12 international awards on best negotiation strategy from the Organization of Public Procurement Officers to the Innovation Award from World Commerce and Contracting to the Strategy Award from IACCM and multiple other amount of awards. So I'm very proud about that the world recognizes the Smartnership negotiation philosophy. Having said that, how does that show up in real life negotiations? Well, I would say we have a lot of white papers and examples on how clients have actually utilized Smartnership and how they're capturing value. So when we are talking about the $12 billion amount of negotiation we've been involved in, advising clients, not talking about training, but advising clients, we can clearly see that a percentage of that amount is generating additional value. So that means that I am winning, but not at your expense, and you're winning, but not at my expense. Again, back to the concept of NegeEconomics. If we are able to identify, capitalize, and utilize that asymmetric value, we can create money that otherwise you wouldn't get and I wouldn't get. So they will just be left on the conference table. Nobody would be able to see it, identify it, and capitalize it. So by using that philosophy, we can actually generate free money on the table. I'll be happy to. NegeEconomics is actually so simple that it sometimes becomes complicated because it's basically just helping us addressing the difference between your cost and my value or my cost and your value. A real life example is a very recent case we have with one of our clients, ConocoPhillips. They were negotiating as buyers with one of their suppliers. And price-wise, that supplier was too expensive and they had to get them down in price, but they didn't have the opportunity of just reducing price. So ConocoPhillips, embracing the idea of Smartnership, started to look for variables that could generate NegeEconomics. And one of the many variables they start identifying was terms of payment. And they start discussing the cost of capital. And they very quickly learned that their cost of capital was way below the supplier's cost of capital. So by utilizing that difference, they could actually capitalize a value of $400,000. So what they did obviously was instead of demanding a long line of credit, they actually offered to pay that supplier way earlier. And by doing that, they capitalized $400,000. Now, nobody had a cost in regards to this because the cost to each side was compensated through that additional value that was generated, and ConocoPhillips could actually get part of that price reduction they needed just by generating NegeEconomics. And again, we have tons of examples of organizations, how they can use NegeEconomics and how they can use it in partnership by generating additional value. That's a wonderful question because this is really a challenge. Quite often you can't see what you don't know exists. So if you can't see it, you don't think it's out there. So one of the really important things, if you want to try out SmartNership and you want to use it in a SmartNership negotiation, is that you have to verbalize and explain what it is you want to do. I call it a role of engagement. So that really means that you have to negotiate on how you want to negotiate before you start negotiation. And I know it sounds weird, but think about it this way. You and I may not perceive negotiation the same way. You may perceive negotiation like playing chess. I may perceive negotiation like playing tennis. So if we want to play with each other, we obviously just can't sit there with a racket and a chessboard. That will look really ridiculous. But compare that to a real life negotiation. That is sometimes what happens during the first day. The parties are playing completely different games, and before they accidentally figure out what the counterpart is playing and realize that the counterpart is playing a different game, they have wasted credibility, trust, relationship, and a lot of time. So one of the things we need to do early on in a negotiation is actually addressing role of engagement. How do we want to negotiate? And spending time on discussing the framework on how we want to negotiate. So one of the things I would definitely advise any negotiator who want to try out SmartNership is doing that, talking about role of engagement, but secondly, also explain the concept of NegeEconomics. Again, NegeEconomics is very simple. It's not rocket science in any possible way, but that doesn't mean that people automatically understand what it is you're trying to do. We see it all the time with clients who are trying it out. If they don't spend the necessary time explaining it to their counterpart, they get resistance, they get some kind of lack of trust from the counterpart, and the counterpart might be thinking there's a hidden agenda. So start off by creating role of engagement and explain what it is you're trying to do. The three most common value leaks, an excellent question. I think there's a lot of them, but one of them is simply not creating openness. If we don't have openness and honesty in negotiation, that's a value leak. If we are not transparent about exchanging cost and value, that is a value leak. We are simply not creating value. Another one is we're not negotiating on the real amount of variables. And a variable is something that is negotiable. So that could be delivery time or warranty, installation or service or what have you. Anything that is negotiable is a variable. So typically, I would say that most of the negotiations I've been involved in throughout my entire career, the parties have been focused on too few variables. I was sitting with an energy company recently. They were doing projects in hundreds of millions of dollars size. And they were typically negotiating on 9 commercial variables. That could be delivery, installation, terms of payment, what have you. We did a brainstorming exercise with them that only took 3 hours. And after 3 hours, we have created 72 variables. So we went from 9 to 72 variables. And by doing that, we actually improved the profit by at least 12%. Again, it's not magic. It's simply just a question about doing your homework. So that's another value leak. The third value leak is probably even the more basic one, having skilled, competent, qualified negotiators. If you are unconsciously incompetent, you don't know what you don't know, and you're sitting negotiating on behalf of your organizations for millions of dollars, you will be losing value. What is actually very intriguing for us is we've been doing this since 1976. So we have had thousands of negotiators participating in thousands and thousands of simulations. And the way we run a simulation in a workshop is that we divide our group into smaller groups of typical 3 individuals. And then they are negotiating towards a counterpart that consists of another 3 people. And obviously, if we have a workshop of, let's say, 12 people, we are running 2 simultaneously negotiations at the same time. And it's the same simulation, there's the same content, they have the same time to prepare. So what is fun that you often can't do in real life is we can compare the outcome of those 2 completely identical negotiations after the 1 hour exercise. And you know what? Throughout the 30 years I've been doing this, I've never seen, I repeat, never seen two negotiations ending up with the same outcome. One of them is always outperforming the other one. And you know what the only ingredients that is different between the two negotiations might be? The people. So if you replace person X with person Y, you might be gaining an additional $3 million, or you might be losing an additional $500,000. It's down to the negotiator. Remember what I'm saying right now. All negotiations is human. That means that we do business with people, not with systems, not with organizations, not with companies. So it's down to your skill and your knowledge and your competence in negotiations. So I would say that's the third value leak that we see in most organizations. The question I often ask my counterpart is, especially if we're sitting on buy side, is there any of our demands or requirement that will cost you a lot of money? Is there anything that will add an additional risk to you that you could quantify and you want to share with us? Because obviously, if your costs on one of our requirement is higher than our savings, then it doesn't make sense to go through with that. So one of the things we're doing right now is we are doing a research comparing competitive bidding with negotiations. And the reason we're doing that is because competitive bidding is happening all the time. Mostly obviously within governmental institutions that just have a love of competitive bidding, but certainly also in the private market where major buyers are using competitive bidding to identify which supplier they want to use. The problem with competitive bidding in most cases is there's no dialogue between the two parties, so there's no understanding from the buy side that if my demand that I put out there, if that demand is generating a higher cost to the supplier than my benefit, then we're basically both losing. So one of the key questions and one of the things that I'm asking often, as I just said in the beginning of our negotiation, if I'm on buy side, is there any of our demands and requirements or questions that will put an unnecessary cost on you? Please let us know. Collaboration outperforms traditional bargaining and zero-sum games the second you want to generate value. So I would say the bigger the negotiation might be, the more complex the negotiation might be, the more you have to focus on collaborative negotiation, what we call partnership. And why? Well, collaborative negotiation enforces and supports a dialogue. It also requires transparency, honesty, and exchange of information. It requires that we expand the number of variables, and it requires that we know the cost and the benefit of each variable. Now, if you are in a traditional zero-sum game and you are the buyer, you might step into a negotiation and tell the counterpart, we want to change the terms of payment from a line of credit from 30 days to 90 days. I was actually in a situation recently where I was sitting with a procurement officer that came to me and said, we want to do that with the supplier. And I said, well, perhaps that's a good idea. What is your cost of capital and what do you gain by changing that? And then he gave me a horrifying answer because his answer was, I don't know, it just sounds good. And I was just sitting there thinking, my God, that is really unintelligence, isn't it? Because back to what I said previously, imagine that your cost is below, or your gain, your benefit is below the cost of the counterpart. Then it doesn't make sense. So let's say that my buyer will save $5,000 by changing that terms of payment, but it will cost the supplier $20,000. Does that really make any sense? Try and do the math. No, it doesn't. So traditional zero-sum, traditional tough bargaining doesn't make sense if you believe that there is value that you should generate, because as I said earlier, that requires an open, transparent dialogue and knowing the value or the cost of the variables you are negotiating. Well, there's a lot of myth about negotiations out there. One of them is that negotiation is a battle. That's a myth. Absolutely wrong. Negotiation is a team effort where we want to create value. Another myth is that if you are the tough guy, if you are the one that is combative, you will gain value. And it's true, you can actually win short term by being combative. But I can promise you one thing, By not generating trust, by not generating collaborative environment, you are losing value. It's a promise, it's a guarantee. You're walking out from a negotiation, perhaps thinking you're the winner, not really realizing that you perhaps left $500,000, $1 million, $5 million on the table because you never see it, you never identify it, you never capitalize it. So I would say a myth among a lot of executives is, I need to be the tough guy. I was running a big workshop for an energy company recently, and there was a gentleman in the audience who, after the first day, came up to me and said, you know what? I'm completely shocked because I thought that being aggressive and combative in negotiation was the right way forward. I thought that would be the way to generate most value. And just after this first day, I now realize that I've been doing this all wrong for the last 20 years, and I have to shift my approach. Now, I have to applaud his honesty, realizing that what he has done wasn't the right way forward. So it's a myth that is the tough guy, the combative negotiator, who will get the best result at the negotiation table. Yes, the word trust currency is two words, obviously, that exist already that I just merged, trust and currency. And the reason I did that is because trust is not a nice thing to have, it's a need thing to have, because trust is a monetary value. Listen carefully. As I said earlier, if we have a high level of trust, our transaction cost will go down and our profit will increase. And the opposite will happen if trust is non-existing in negotiation. Trust is not a fluffy thing. And a lot of people obviously say, well, I understand trust is nice to have, but I don't really see it's necessary. No, it's not necessary if you don't want to capitalize on all the value in a negotiation. But if you really want to gain all the value, you need trust present at the table. So trust currency basically just means that if trust is there, if we are transparent, if we are honest, we will create more value. That's why we call it trust currency. In my doctorate, I studied trust, negotiation, and AI, and we managed to identify that trust could generate up to 34% more value in high trust negotiations compared to low trust negotiations. This is a solid number. It's just a gut feeling. It's not a gut feeling. It's not just something I feel could be right. It's studied, it's research, it's proven through data. So we can actually capitalize trust. That's why we call it trust currency. It is a monetary value. And the smart negotiator is diving further into that and also addressing how AI can help you find that trust currency. That's an excellent question. What is a trust killer? Well, there is a lot of trust killers in negotiations, but I would probably say, and this may sound weird, one of the trust killers is not verbalizing trust, not talking about trust, and feeling that trust is a kind of taboo that you cannot address. I often recommend to my clients that we have to talk about trust in the beginning of a negotiation with a counterpart that we're not familiar with. We can actually put it on the agenda. So we might have introduction, who's who, do we have the mandate, what variables are we going to negotiate, and then trust. And by talking about trust, I mean that we are being allowed to address if we feel that trust is declining. We are allowed to tell the counterpart if we are feeling less trust in them because they did something or said something, and they are certainly allowed to do the same to us. So I would say one of the trust killers is actually not addressing trust. Good question. Can trust be created in one sentence? I think we all know the feeling that you step into a conference room and on the other side of the table is an individual that you've never seen before, you never met before, and you either instantly get a stomach sensation that you like and trust that person, or you get a stomach sensation that you don't like and don't trust that person. Now, your stomach sensation could be right, but it could also be wrong. So we can't just blindly follow our stomach sensation, but quite often it's giving us a direction, and obviously we can test that afterwards. I also have to say something else. Think about it this way. Do you know somebody you really like but don't trust? And do you also trust somebody that you don't like? I think both of these are the cases. I know it's a case for me. I have a very good friend. I like this individual very much. We have the same sense of humor. He's a wonderful company, but I don't trust him. On the other hand, I also know people I really don't like, but I actually trust them. So likability and trust don't necessarily go hand in hand. They often do, but not all the time. So back to your question, can trust actually be built in one sentence? I would say yes, but it takes time. So I would say always validate trust. Don't be naive. And I'm obviously a very strong advocate for trust in collaborations, but I'm not naive either. So that means that we have to validate. We have to make sure that we can trust the counterpart. Normally, I would say it takes time to build up trust, but you can lose it like that in a second, right? The counterpart is being caught in bluffing or lying, trust is gone. It takes nothing more than that. So it takes time typically to build up trust, but you can also use measured and tools to enforce it and speed the process up. And I'm addressing that in the Smart Negotiator as well, how you can do that and how you can capitalize the benefit of trust. Negotiation with zero trust. That's very dramatic. I would say one thing is low trust, another thing is zero trust. Zero trust obviously means that you don't believe a word of what the counterpart is saying, and they typically don't believe a word of what you are saying. That is very dramatic, and it's almost warfare, isn't it? Have I ever been in a negotiation like that? I'm not sure. I don't think I've been in absolutely zero trust negotiation, because quite often if you have an alternative and a choice, you wouldn't go through with that negotiation. I've been in lots of negotiation where trust has been crazy low. And what happened? Well, I can say without any doubt, we lost value at the table. We may have concluded a deal, but I'm certain we walked out not having capitalized all the value available. And that is what happens when we don't embrace trust in negotiation. Yes, great question. It's important for me that my audience and my readers understand that this book is not the traditional negotiation book. This is a book on AI in negotiation. So is it a AI book or a negotiation book? I will let the reader decide that themselves. If you look at the book ranking already on Amazon, you can see that it appears both on AI ranking and negotiation and communication and business. So I guess it's all of that. Now, one of the key things is, one of your questions was, what role does AI have in the future of business? And I think I can sum that up by saying everything. We will not see any important business deal in the future being conducted without the use of AI. And I would even add the word hopefully. I would also challenge the audience here right now by saying if AI could replace you, it probably should. Because if you are not able to outperform AI and prove your own worth and value, well, why should you be sitting there doing it? Why not just let AI doing it? I know it sounds very cynical, but that's the way it is with new technology, isn't it? If technology is better than you, there's no reason for you to be there. So you should actually become a better negotiator. You should be challenged by AI, because otherwise AI will be a better negotiator than you. Now, one of the questions I'm getting a lot is from a lot of business people in negotiation is that, will I be replaced by AI? And my answer to that is, I don't know. I don't think so. But what I do know is that negotiators using AI will do better than negotiators not using AI. So I strongly encourage you to start studying the use of AI in negotiation. Something I find a bit scary is that I deliver a lot of keynote presentations around the world, and I'm always asking my audience in the last year or so, how many of you are actually already using AI professionally in negotiation? I'm not talking about for fun, just finding recipe, asking about a travel experience in Rome, but how can I use AI professionally in negotiation? And most of the time, I see very, very few people raise their hand. The most recent one I did, I had 600 people in the room asking the question, how many of you are using AI professionally in your negotiation? I counted 10 hands out of 600, which is not unusual. So I hope the Smart Negotiator will be the starting point for a lot of people to get to know AI in negotiation, also get cheat sheet and checklist on how to specifically using AI in negotiation. Because I feel a lot of people, it's not because they don't want to use AI in negotiation, but they're not really sure about how to use it correctly. And obviously you need some kind of information, background, education, or book to figure that out. So the Smart Negotiator is a wonderful choice for doing just that. Yes, we already have a number of cases where we have started using AI in negotiation and seeing it being rewarded. One of the most recent one was we had a renegotiation of an existing contract. And we took the contracts, removed everything confidential, and uploaded it to an AI tool and asked AI to be me. So we just said, AI, you are now Keld Jensen. AI systems knows of me and partnership and NegeEconomics and trust currency and all of that. So you don't even have to tell AI systems in general what it is. You can just ask AI to be me and use the partnership NegeEconomic concept. So we uploaded the contracts, told the AI system that it was now Keld Jensen, and then ask it to identify variables in the contract that could utilize NegeEconomics. And as usual, it took about 6 seconds and it came up with a perfect long list of things that should be negotiated to generate value. And that generated value, we actually found an existing contract that had a value of $25 million. We found $1.7 million that otherwise wouldn't have been capitalized. So that's one of many examples where AI can basically quickly and efficiently identify value that we typically wouldn't address otherwise. I think one of the misconceptions from a lot of companies right now and why they're not using AI in negotiations is probably nervousness about how to use it efficiently. And they're also nervous about sharing data, obviously. I'm a professor at a university in Europe, and I'm doing a lecture there twice a year for master students. And obviously, I have integrated AI into the lectures right now because we have to. So they are being trained in how to use AI in negotiations. And at the exam, I wrote the exam for them to use AI as well. And uploaded the exam. It had to be approved, and it didn't. Because the head of the school came back to me and said, we have to ask you to remove the requirement that the students should use AI in their exam because that's not allowed. And I was just tapping on my watch and thinking, are we actually in 2025? Because it's weird to me that you have academic institutions and all companies around the world that is not allowing their organizations or students to use AI. I can only give them one piece of advice. They have to rethink very quickly how this can be done differently, because AI is not a choice. It is a requirement. It is here to stay. So we have to use that in negotiations. That is a great question. We probably all know the saying crap in, crap out. And if you load AI with bad information, you will typically get bad answers as well. Now, AI is not a shortcut to understand negotiations. So it requires that you are a skilled, educated, experienced negotiator before you really start using AI in negotiation. Otherwise, compare it to you don't even have a driver's license and you step into a Formula One racing car and you just speed off. Well, you might be driving a little bit and then you will crash and burn. And the same thing will happen in negotiation. If you step into AI, start using AI and think that that can just compensate for the fact that you don't know how to negotiate, you're going to crash and burn. So you need the background, you need the understanding, you need the training, you need to understand the techniques and all the details in how to be a proper professional negotiator before you should be authorized to start using AI. Do I trust AI to negotiate a deal on my behalf? That's a wonderful question. The short answer would be no. I would not have AI negotiate entirely without me being there controlling AI. I wouldn't recommend anybody doing that either. I do see organizations that are trying to sell technology that they call autonomous negotiations, where AI basically is handling negotiation on its own. But let me challenge that for a moment. I don't call that negotiation, because in most cases, it's basically a zero-sum game where the technology is just being used to squeeze the supplier for a better price. That is not advanced professional negotiation. That is simply just a bargaining tool to create a better outcome for you, but you're not identifying or capitalizing NegeEconomics. So the answer would be no. I would not at this point have my AI negotiating anything on their own. I would not go into any negotiation without using AI, but it will be an assistant to me, and it should be exactly that, an assistant to the professional negotiator. I don't think specifically there will be an industry that will benefit more than others. Having said that, though, we have studied different industries just to see if any industries would capitalize more on NegeEconomics, the asymmetric value in negotiation, than others. And we did find that, for instance, construction is an industry that could capitalize way more value than a lot of other industries. So, connecting that to your question, yeah, I think that perhaps the construction industry should be one of the industries that is start looking at AI right now and start embracing and using AI as quickly as possible. Unfortunately, a lot of negotiators think that manipulating is part of the game in a negotiation. I don't. Negotiations, commercial negotiations, is not a hostage negotiations. We are not there to outmaneuver, to manipulate the counterpart. We are there to create value, and we can't do that by trying to ask street smart questions. It's not a party at home. It's not a game. It's not a competition. It's a collaborative team effort where we want to create 2 + 2 equals more than 4. And a recent study from MIT actually found that when they inserted AI bots to negotiate with each other, they found that even AI disliked to be manipulated. So the AI bot that was using manipulating behavior actually gained value, but ended up being in the lowest 12% ranked on trust and collaboration. So it's not a long-term thing. It's not something that is generating trust and reliability. I don't think I can list specifically the top 2 most manipulating things out there, but there are certain books out there that is basically preaching a manipulating behavior. So I would just warn against those books, and some of them are really doing well and even are bestsellers, and some of them are just based on manipulating behavior. And again, I have to say, why do we negotiate commercially? To create and distribute value. And you're probably not going to do that following any manipulating tactics. Yes, creating urgency. We also call it deadline or fake deadline, because what we see quite often is that one side is saying, well, we have to wrap this up by August 1st, and if we don't, there'll be no deal. And the counterpart may just accept that, embrace that, and thinking, oh my God, we have a deadline that is August 1st. But I'm always wondering when I'm sitting at the conference table and the counterpart is telling my client that, I'm always thinking, so, but that's your opinion. Who says that that is actually the rule? So we can start negotiating that deal. We just saw it most recently with the trade agreement between EU and the US, where the US had put up a deadline of August 1st and told EU that we have to be done by August 1st. Otherwise, there's no deal and we will go back to a sky-high tariff. I would claim that the EU negotiator fell right into that trap and got stressed because they thought, hey, we got to do it. And we have to wrap up a deal before August 1st. So I would basically just flip that. I would ask a question, back to being open, transparent again, saying, what is the value to you by reaching August 1st? What would the cost be if we don't manage to reach that deal at that date? Would there be a cost connected to that? So I would need to understand the counterpart, why they're saying August 1st and not just accept that date. I don't really use tactics, so there isn't an ethical tactics in the book I would recommend any of the readers. I'm very simple. I think we should just say it as it is, not beat around the bush, not playing a game. Just talk about the variables that is important to us. Don't be afraid of saying something is important. Say if something doesn't matter to us and explain why. Be well prepared and know your numbers. Negotiation is not a game. It's a group exercise to help you reduce your cost and your liability and help you improve your profit. And I expect you to help me reduce my cost, my liabilities, my risk, and improve my profit. And how can we do that together? That's negotiation to me. I want to walk out of that room creating more value than when I walked in, but it shouldn't happen at your expense. And I want you to become more successful, but that shouldn't happen at my expense. And the wonderful thing is that is possible in 99 out of 100 negotiations. But you need to know how. And that's obviously where the education and training in smartmanship comes in. Oh, absolutely, it is. You have to understand that not everybody have studied partnership, economics, trust currency, and you even have people who studied it that don't believe in it. So you'll have tons of negotiators out there that will be using any what I would call unethical tactics in a negotiation to gain ahead. They'll do whatever they can to get ahead, and they might be using take it or leave it as well, or a bunch of other techniques and tools. Now, the good thing is that AI knows all of these techniques as well. So what I would do is basically read, for instance, my previous book, The 103 Elements, that goes through 103 things, including unethical tactical elements, to study it before you get into a negotiation, or simply just ask AI about it. What should I be aware of? What kind of unethical tactics could the counterpart be using? One negotiation that stands out, that's a really good question. I would say there's a company in Denmark named Blue Culling that is wastewater company owned by the local government that very early on took in the concept of partnership and NegeEconomics. They actually won the Negotiation of the Year award from an organization in Denmark by doing it. And their approach was actually very simple. We produced a white paper about it that if you're interested, just reach out to us and we'll be happy to send it to you. But their approach was early. They were early movers. And what I was so happy to see that they did many years ago was that they immediately created a value of 10%. And 10% in this case was $1 million, just in one negotiation by changing the view on how to negotiate. This is by far not at all the biggest negotiation I've been involved in, or any of our clients have been involved in trying to generate that value. But it just stands out to me as probably one of the first ones, and probably that's why I love it so much. So yeah, I would probably name that as a great example. I'm wondering on that as well. Why do governments, not only governments, but private organizations, rely on competitive bidding, tenders, and auctions instead of negotiations? Well, the official message often when I ask them is that we want to eliminate the risk of corruption. That's nice. I agree with that. Corruption is a bad thing. But is competitive bidding, tenders, auctions really the only way forward? If I'm really in a provoking mood, I would say the reason some of them are doing it, obviously they have to follow the law. I fully appreciate that. But the reason some of them are doing it is simply because they might be afraid of negotiation. And it's so much easier just sitting in your office behind a screen and writing down clauses that you want the counterpart to follow. What we have to understand, and this is important, is that we are losing so much value by just using competitive bidding. Now, can we use competitive bidding in a positive format? Of course we can. We can do it to filter and identify the 3 or 4 suppliers we want to get into a dialogue with. So we could start off with a kind of competitive bidding. When we then have qualified the best 3 or 4 or 5 suppliers, then we should throw competitive bidding out the window and start to negotiate. Oh, I love that question. What would I change the first? Competitive bidding. I would carefully evaluate every single project to see if competitive bidding is the right method to gain the best possible outcome, not only for me as a buyer, but certainly for the supplier as well. I would sit down carefully and study all of those projects. Secondly, I would look at previous projects, reopen the contracts, and renegotiate those contracts in the spirit of partnership. And the reason I would do that is I can promise you that millions and millions of euros and dollars and pounds and what have you have been wasted by doing most of those projects in a zero-sum approach, in a competitive bidding approach. You have lost enormous amount of value. And in the book, The Smart Negotiator, I actually explain how AI can help you do just that. How it can help you look at existing contract and figure out what value that was not discussed at the point of that contract, and why it's not a part of the value generation in that contract. Another great question, the biggest misunderstanding among leaders in general about a strategy. Well, I would say the biggest misunderstanding is they don't have one. In most of the cases, when I walk into an organization and ask them, could I please see your official negotiation strategy? There is a long pause, and then some of them goes, because they don't have one. There isn't an official negotiation strategy in majority of governments and major organizations in the world. Some of them think they have one, but they actually don't. It's just a tactic. It's not a strategy. So I would say the biggest surprise to most organizations is how important it is that they get one when they realize the importance of having a negotiation strategy, and then realizing that there isn't any. So I would say takeaway right now, you have to sit down, create a negotiation strategy. The biggest difference from the Smart Negotiator is it's technology focused. Very few of my other books have had any focus on technology. I start talking about it in the 103 Elements that came out last year. But the Smart Negotiator is all about how to integrate AI into negotiation. So it's combining the psychology and understanding of negotiation with the technology of AI. That is the biggest difference between this book and any of the other 26 books that I have published already. One chapter that you should read twice. Well, I actually had one of the executives that endorsed the book was Mr. Tarek Amin from Bechtel, and he actually said it's a book that he would recommend that you read twice. So he talked about the entire book. If I should pick a chapter, I would probably pick the chapter on prompting. Simply because understanding and using AI professionally is about the prompting. How do we prompt it correctly? The book comes with a checklist on prompting, what specific prompt you could use to gain the benefit of AI. So the chapter on prompting, it contains more than 100 prompts that you can use, and obviously there's a lot more out there, and we keep updating it. So when you get the book, you can also go online and just download the most recent study on prompts as well. But long answer to your question, the chapter on prompting. I obviously hope that all of my books will leave an impact on the next generation of negotiators. It's my hope that we can slowly change the understanding that negotiation is a conflict, a confrontation, a battle. It is my hope that we can educate the future of negotiators, understanding that a collaborative approach into negotiation generates more value for both parties. So it's my hope that this book can help emphasize that message, and also help emphasizing that AI can support us in doing just that. Our research has shown that negotiators negotiating with counterparts where both parties are using AI creates more transparency, more trust, and more openness compared to negotiations where nobody's using AI. It's interesting to me that using AI actually generates more trust, more credibility, more openness, and more transparency. And we also kind of figured out why, which is explained in the book, and also obviously how we should use AI properly in negotiations. So that would be my hope, that we can change the mindset of what negotiation really is and what negotiation isn't. I think, to be honest, there's too many books on negotiations out there that is just trying to make the horse and the buggy runs faster. And I don't think we need that. I think we need to invent the car. We need to completely change the way that we transport ourselves. And that means changing the mindset on what negotiation is and isn't. We always get the same feedback from our audience in our workshop. They are attending a workshop thinking, here we go, another workshop on negotiation. But they leave completely stunned and surprised because they got something very different. Something they really appreciate and like, but very different of what they thought they would be getting. I think I see a world right now that is more occupied by conflicts than we have seen in many, many, many years. I think we see a world right now where the me behavior is out there, egocentric, combative, less collaborative. And I don't think the recipe of dealing with that is becoming more combative and more serious focused. I think it's the opposite that will cure that disease. I often say that trust is what we need. And if it doesn't work, increase the dose. So we need to be more collaborative. We need to focus on collaboration, not only in commercial negotiation, but in life in general. Life is not a zero-sum game. It's not you winning at the expense of the counterpart or the counterpart winning at your expense. We only win if everybody wins. The question I love to ask at the beginning of any negotiation is, how can I help you reduce your cost, liabilities, and risk while securing that your profit will increase? That is obviously surprising to the counterpart. They will be sitting there looking a little bit suspicious, but they will answer that. And then after they have answered that, then I will say, and here goes, this is how you can help me reduce my cost, risk, liabilities, and help me improve my profit. Because that's what we want to do in this negotiation. We want to reduce the cost and increase the profits. The most overrated piece of negotiation advice would be all the tactical questions that some negotiation trainers claim that you should be using. I would call it manipulating tactics. They are overrated. They could give you a short gain, but they're not creating real value and long-term relationships. So you're asking, will AI make negotiators better, worse, or irrelevant? All of the above, really. It can certainly make negotiators better. It can also make them worse, and it can also make them irrelevant. I would say that if AI can do something better than you, there's no need for you to be there. And I know it sounds very cynical, but that will be the future. And I promise. AI will replace you if you don't create value on your own. And if AI can do it better than you, you will not be there. So make sure that you're better than AI in negotiations. Otherwise, you will not be sitting there negotiating. A superpower in negotiation. I don't think I have one. I don't think anybody has a superpower. But there are superpowers in negotiation. And a superpower in negotiations, one of many, is the ability to really listen. Not just listening to the words, but the value behind the word. I often say that you should replace the sound of a word with the sound of a cash register. Negotiator will only raise a topic if there is a financial interest in that topic. So if somebody comes to you and said, I would like to change delivery time, you should not start arguing saying, we can't do that. Or you shouldn't say, okay, of course we can do that. You should immediately think there might be a financial impact if we do it. So you should reply to their question with a question saying, what is the value to you if we actually change that? So the secret superpower is really listening to the value behind the question. Both parties walk out with a higher value than they expected when they came into that negotiation. I would say that is the best deal. So the best deal is you enter a negotiation, you have an ambition that is right here, but you walk out with a result that is higher than your ambition level. I think that is the best possible deal that you can get.